Well, today marks 35 years since Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day was first observed as a federal holiday. Over his lifetime, Dr. King taught that nonviolence was the most effective means for bringing about social change, a legacy that we still see to this day. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated April 4th, 1968, at the age of 39. So for more on this, we want to bring in a CBS News political contributor, Antjuan Seawright. Antjuan, it's been 53 years since Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Can you briefly explain, what his legacy means today?
Well, Anne-Marie, they say well-behaved men and women rarely make history. We know that to be true because Martin Luther King Jr. spent his life misbehaving. A husband, a father, a pastor, a leader of perhaps one of the most transformational movements in this country. And he all did it under the idea that he did not want to see what we're starting to see now in this idea of two Americas. You can call Dr. King so many different things, but I oftentimes refer to him as a true patriot and a true architect, building the necessary capacity to get us to a more perfect union. And I think that's what his legacy is about. And Emery, he was not popular. Keep in mind his disapproval rating, according to a Harris poll, had him around above 70% disapproval. From 1963 to 1968, his disapproval increased by 25%. And so if you look at the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, you will know that the work he did was consequential, yet it was not necessarily approved by those who were monitoring the work being done during his day.
Well, he certainly is popular now. Certainly his words are popular. You wrote a really interesting piece about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., and you open it by talking about hearing certain lawmakers quote the Reverend. And I wonder if you think that they fully understand the nature of his words and whether or not, the way some people liberally quote him, whether or not they're cheapening his words.
Well, Emery, it's oftentimes funny to hear on the third Monday of January every year, lawmakers, leaders, and others quote Dr. King, but have no true interest in embracing what Dr. King really stood for. It's so easy to hide behind a press release from your office or to put a quote on social media or even to rehearse a quote, but yet when you get back to doing the business you have been assigned to do or elected to do, it does not reflect the quote that you mentioned. When I think about the things that Dr. King really stood for, not just the civil rights movement, but he fought to make certain that equality and inequality were a reality in this country. He fought to make sure that there were people who looked like me who would eventually come along who would not be on the menu but at the table. And I look at the decisions lawmakers made, whether it's voting rights, whether it's healthcare, whether it's injustices in education, all those things still exist in the United States, and these people fight for these things, yet they quote Dr. King and show their love for him on this holiday.
You wrote something else that really sort of stuck out to me, and I imagine, when we were watching the chaos descend on the Capitol building, many of the people there felt like they were within their rights, like they were doing something for the betterment of this country. And you write in your piece that a riot is not a revolution. And there's a difference between a mob and a movement. And when I read the word movement, it occurred to me that movement is one of the words that President Trump used to describe what it was that, he saw, what it was that he was doing. Can you just speak to that, why you felt it necessary to sort of express the difference? Because I think, people see these pictures of Martin Luther King Jr. and these, thousands and thousands of people who had descended on the Capitol to demand equal rights. And mentally, they're probably comparing them to what they saw on January 6th. And those two groups are nothing alike.
Anne-Marie, there was nothing about Dr. King, his legacy, or the movement in general that embraced what we saw at the Capitol just days ago. He practiced and embraced nonviolence. He did, even when people were spitting on him, arresting him for just trying to do the right thing, beating up some of his frontline soldiers, like my dear friend and mentor, the late John Lewis. I mean, he still just did the right thing in the idea of nonviolence. What we saw last week does not compare. So nothing makes my engine overheat more when I see people try to make the comparisons of during the days of King and Lewis and others to what we saw last week. That was just, those people last week did not display what Martin Luther King was all about.
I could talk way more to you, and I'd love to, but we are running out of time. But I think your piece is really, really interesting, and it sort of just nails a feeling that I think a lot of us feel when we see, you know, the images of Martin Luther King, his words being used in a way that it does not reflect what the true spirit of that movement was. Antjuan Seawright, thank you so much.